Have you ever felt that the person you trusted the most betrayed you the moment you needed it the most? This is the story of a woman who, after being abandoned and deceived by her partner, discovers the truth that will transform her forever. Join us on this journey of pain, revelations, and finally, rebirth. Do you dare to discover how self-love can heal the deepest wounds? If this story has touched you, do not forget to subscribe for more stories that will change your perspective on life and love. Do not miss it. It was a quiet afternoon when she met Andres. An afternoon that seemed so normal, but that became the beginning of a story that would change her life forever. At that time, all she wanted was to find stability, someone to trust. Life had taught her to be cautious, but Andres seemed to be everything he needed to finally lower his guard. He had that warm smile that made him feel safe, and his voice had the power to calm the storms that sometimes struck his heart. At first, everything was perfect. Months passed building a relationship full of promises, of those little gestures that make you feel that what you have is something unbreakable. He made her feel special, loved, desired. She, in turn, gave him her trust without reservations, sure that he had found the person who would stay by his side forever. During their first dates, they shared laughs that seemed to have no end, conversations until late hours of the morning, and plans for a future that they both wanted to achieve. Andres was everything she had dreamed of: a partner, a friend, a lover. Together, everything seemed to be possible. His love was his refuge, and she thought that nothing could change that. However, over the months, something began to change. It was not something obvious, but he felt it. The nights they spent together became shorter, the most superficial conversations. Every time she looked for his gaze, something in him was lost. The man so close and affectionate before now seemed to be more distant. Sometimes, the little gestures of affection became cold, as if he were losing interest without saying a word. And although their lips continued to repeat the same promises of love, their eyes no longer shone with the same intensity. She didn't want to believe that something was changing. She didn't want to face that reality, because she loved Andres with all her soul. But deep down, she felt that there was something that was fading, something she couldn't touch, but she could feel, and that terrified her. She preferred to ignore those signals. She preferred to cling to the idea that love could do everything, that everything would happen, that nothing would change. What she didn't know was that that dream that she had been weaving so carefully was about to break. Love, sometimes, becomes such a perfect illusion that one does not want to see the cracks that appear little by little. She was happy, yes, but she didn't know that that happiness was about to be broken in a way that she never imagined. Here begins the story, with that first glimpse of what seemed to be a perfect relationship, but that in the shadows already hid something that would change everything. I will continue to develop the next chapter when you are ready. Would you like to continue, or just something at this beginning? The days slipped like water between her fingers, without her noticing how something essential was draining into their relationship. At first, the small changes went unnoticed, but soon they became more evident. Andres was no longer as present as before. The long nightly conversations, those exchanges of ideas and dreams, were replaced by short and absent answers. The spark that once lit their moments together went out slowly, but she did not know how to name it, how to face it. She was looking for reasons to justify the distance. Maybe the job was taking too long of her life. Maybe she was getting tired of the same routines. Or maybe there was something she was doing wrong, something that could improve to give her back that closeness that they so naturally shared at the beginning. But the more she thought about it, the more doubt took over her. There was one day, a particularly quiet night, in which he returned later than usual. There was a palpable coldness in his attitude. He seemed worried, but he never told her why. "It's just work," he apologized. She did not ask anymore, trusting his word, as she had always done. However, the small voice inside him began to raise a scream of alert. Something was not right. It was a subtle but persistent feeling. At first, he tried to drown his thoughts, to continue with his life as if nothing was changing. The relationship was still good, although the moments they shared together became rarer. From time to time, Andres seemed to be more interested in his phone or his computer than in her. There were no caresses without reason or sweet words at random. Even his eyes, which once shone when he looked at her, became opaque and absent. He wondered if he had changed, or if she was the one who could no longer see what was so clear before. The little details became more and more difficult to ignore. On the occasions where he tried to talk to him about how he felt, he always had an excuse ready. "I'm tired. Honey, I need to rest. You know how the job is. I'm sorry it happened to me. But I promise you that next time." And she, out of love, convinced herself that it was just a phase, that everything would be like before. However, his suspicions grew more and more. That inner voice that he had ignored at first began to scream louder, and she, no matter how hard he tried to silence her, could no longer silence herself. Something was wrong, but he didn't want to be the person who confronted him without proof. The fear of losing him paralyzed her. Maybe, just maybe, his love could still save them. It was on one of those nights when he came back late, again, when she noticed something that shook her. Her phone, forgotten on the table, vibrated several times in a row. It was not the first time that something like this happened, but that night something was different. For a moment, he found himself looking at that device with a strange feeling in his stomach, a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Should I look?" he asked. Doubt filled him inside, but he could not help it. His hand, almost unintentionally, took the phone. A couple of notifications on the screen, messages from a person he did not recognize. And then he read a word that completely healed her. A name. The closeness and the tone of the messages made him feel that something was much closer than he had imagined. Fear took over his heart. And at that moment, a part of her knew that everything had changed. There was no turning back. The clock seemed to have stopped the moment his eyes went through those messages. The phone screen lit up with each notification, and in his mind, each word seemed to echo like an echo. He could not believe what he saw. There was a connection between Andres and that person, something beyond what she could have anticipated. Fear paralyzed her, but curiosity forced her to continue reading. The messages were short, but loaded with a tone that left no room for doubt. There was something more between them, something intimate, something that should not exist. Her name appeared repeatedly in the conversation, accompanied by words that reflected complicity, promises, and what seemed to be a secret relationship. The protagonist's heart began to beat loudly. His hand was shaking, and for a moment, he thought that everything could be a misinterpretation. Maybe he was seeing something that was not real. Perhaps the words were out of context. But no, something inside him told him that there was no turning back. Everything he had suspected, everything he had felt in the depths of his being, was confirmed. Andres was betraying her. The pain that invaded her was so deep that he could not find words to describe it. The man with whom she had shared her life, her dreams and hopes, had now left her alone in a sea of lies. Doubt began to consume her. How long had this been going on? How many times had she ignored the signs, blindly trusting the wrong person? Suddenly, the image of their life together collapsed. The promises of eternal love, the plans for the future, everything faded in a sigh. The man she thought she knew deeply became a stranger. How did he not see the signs? How could he be so blind? Anger mixed with pain, but also with a strange feeling of liberation. He knew that what he'd found had no turning back. And although it burned him inside, deep down he felt that his life could no longer continue under that shadow of a lie. Andres was not at home when she decided to confront him. His mind was in chaos, but there was a growing determination that pushed him to face the truth. He gave her time to return, but as soon as he did, she knew she couldn't wait any longer. As soon as he crossed the door, her gaze avoided his. That little evasion was all she needed to know, that he knew what he had discovered. "We have to talk," she said, her voice trembling, but firm. Andres tried to avoid the conversation, but she didn't allow it. Suddenly, his heart no longer belonged to him. She was determined to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. "Who is she?" he asked with a broken but challenging voice. Andres could not look her in the eye. There were no excuses. There were no words that could cover the dense silence that filled the room. And there, in that space between them, the truth came out of his mouth in a whisper. He was a friend from work. "I'm sorry. I don't know how it happened. It was never my intention. But the words didn't have the same weight. Nothing she said could heal what was broken. The betrayal was made, and she knew it. The lie had been discovered, and there was no turning back. The impact of Andres' words resonated in his head like an unbearable echo. "It was never my intention," he said, but those words, rather than relieving her, made her feel emptier. It was not just the fact that he had deceived her, but the way he did it, with inexplicable calm, tore a piece of his confidence from her. She felt like a stranger in her own life. Time at that moment lost its value. Hours and minutes were drawn out, turned into a spiral of dark thoughts and overflowing emotions. While Andres was trying to justify himself, she was no longer listening. He had reached a point where he no longer cared what he could say. The reality was clear to her. The man he loved had betrayed her in the cruelest way when he needed it most. The pain was not only emotional, he felt that his very soul was tearing. Everything that had been his life together, everything he had dreamed of the future, disappeared like smoke. Sadness became a heavy burden on his chest, and the tears, those that he had never wanted to shed for him, began to fall in silence. Each tear was like a confession that something irreparable had happened. Not only did she feel betrayed, but humiliated. He had failed in what mattered most, his confidence. The days passed and his mind found no peace. Every corner of the house, every object they shared before, now drowned him. The place that had been his home turned into a battlefield of memories, of broken promises. When he looked at the photo of both at the table, smiling happily, he was unable to recognize the people who appeared there. Was it them? Was this the same life he had dreamed of? For the night, nightmares harassed her. She woke up in the middle of the darkness, the feeling of abandonment still weighing on her chest. The most terrifying question pursued her. How could she be so blind? The love he had given felt like a mistake now. He thought about the sacrifices he had made for him, in the moments in which he put his dreams in the background for Andres's, and everything he had built together became a mirage. Now, she was alone, in the midst of her own pain, looking for answers out of nowhere, despite everything. What devastated her the most was that she still loved him. Love does not disappear from one day to the next, and although his heart was broken, he continued to long for everything to be a bad dream. He thought about the times when he had promised to be by his side, in the moment of happiness they shared, and he felt that those memories crushed him even more. He could not stop wondering, how can someone who loves you so much do this to you? Every day that passed, the uncertainty grew. The pain of knowing that the relationship that had been his refuge, his safe place, was now full of lies, left it broken. He did not know what to expect. He could not look at Andres without his tears blinding him, but he did not know how to get away from him, how to start again. Betrayal had settled in his life, and without knowing it, he had begun to change it. His life, once full of light, was now dominated by shadows. Every attempt to smile was overshadowed by sadness, and the feeling of emptiness grew every minute. He felt as if he were in a closed room, without windows, without an exit. As the days passed, the protagonist began to feel trapped in his own emotional storm. The pain of betrayal was still there, latent and profound, but something within her began to awaken. She was exhausted from dragging herself through life, from living trapped in the memories of a love that no longer existed the way she had believed. Uncertainty consumed her, but also the need to find answers. How could he have gotten to this point? What really happened between them? Time, at last, gave him something he did not expect: perspective. One day, as he reflected on everything that happened, he remembered something that Andres had told him, something that at first he had overlooked. There are things that you cannot understand now, but I will tell you when the right time is. In his mind, those words, so mysterious at the time, began to take on a new meaning. Something inside him told him that he had not only failed as a couple, but that perhaps there was a deeper reason behind his behavior. Decided to get answers, the protagonist searched the whole house, checking things that he would not have touched before. In a box stored at the top of the closet, he found a letter that Andres had received weeks ago. It was addressed to him from a person he did not know. The envelope, now stained by the passage of time, seemed old, but when he opened it, what he found inside left her speechless. It was an apology letter, not from someone he had hurt, but from a woman whom he apparently had abandoned when reading the words in the letter. He realized that the story Andres had told him about his relationship with that other person was not as simple as it seemed. The letter spoke of love, of unfulfilled promises, of a relationship broken by secrets that had never come to light. That woman had not only loved him, but had also lost him, as she had done. That letter revealed an uncomfortable truth that Andres had never told her. His relationship with her was not just a passing adventure, but a story of the past that he had never closed. The letter spoke to him of regret, remorse, and Andres' internal struggle that he had never been able to let go of his past. By understanding this, something within her became clearer. It was not that Andres had betrayed her without reason, but that, for some reason, he had been unable to let go of his own demons. In his mind, the truth was forming like a piece that finally fit into the puzzle, although it was not an easy truth to accept. Betrayal was not just an act of disloyalty toward her, but a consequence of Andres' own unresolved conflicts, which, unfortunately, he had dragged into his relationship. His suffering, his inability to be the man she needed, had been fed by his own past, one that he could never overcome. It was a moment of clarity that freed her from guilt. She no longer saw herself as a victim of betrayal, but as a woman who had been dragged by the insecurities of her partner. This revelation did not eliminate the pain, but it did allow her to see things from a new perspective. She was no longer just a disappointed woman, but someone who understood the reasons that had led Andres to act as he did. And at that moment, the protagonist found the strength to look forward. She was not going to continue living in the shadow of betrayal or burdened with the weight of his regret. The truth, although painful, opened her eyes, and, for the first time in weeks, she began to see a way out, a path to her own healing. With the weight of the truth revealed on her shoulders, the protagonist felt that something inside her had changed. She had spent weeks immersed in pain, not knowing where to direct her energy. But now, for the first time, she understood that what Andres had done was not just a betrayal of his trust, but a reflection of his own internal conflicts. She was not to blame, and that freed her, although the pain of the wound was still present. During the following days, the protagonist began to make decisions that she would not have dared consider before. She did not want to continue living in suffering. Although she loved Andres, she could not continue clinging to a relationship that had been marked by mistrust and lies. She knew she needed time to heal, to discover who was outside that relationship, and most importantly, to learn to love herself again. It was on a rainy afternoon when the unexpected happened. While she was at home, reviewing some of her things and putting her life in order, she found an old diary that she had started writing long before meeting Andres. On those pages, she had let herself be carried away by her deepest thoughts, her fears, her hopes and dreams. She read words that she had forgotten, reflections on her life before everything changed, on her personal longings and her struggle to be happy. That diary, forgotten in a box in her closet, became her refuge. When reading those words, the protagonist realized something crucial. She had been looking for happiness outside of herself, putting her well-being in the hands of someone else. She had allowed Andres to fill a void that, in reality, only she could fill. That revelation was what saved her. She did not need anyone else to be happy, neither Andres nor anyone else. The key to healing and moving on was inside her. It was then that she decided that, although the pain would continue to accompany her for a while, it would no longer let her define her life. The truth about Andres' betrayal gave her a new perspective. She no longer saw him as a man who had hurt her, but as an imperfect human being, trapped in his own insecurities, who had failed, but whose story should not be the one that would govern his own destiny. She made the decision to stay away from him, not because she did not love him, but because she understood that she could not continue in a relationship that was no longer healthy for either of them. She had to prioritize herself, her mental and emotional health, and work to rebuild her life without the shadow of betrayal. That night, while she was alone at home, observing the reflection of herself in the mirror, for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. She was not the broken and desperate woman she was before. She had begun to heal, and although the path would not be easy, she was no longer afraid to walk it alone. She had learned to forgive herself, to let go what she could not control, and most importantly, she had discovered that her happiness did not depend on anything or anyone else. The months passed, and with each day, the protagonist felt how the weight of betrayal began to fade. They no longer thought Andres with the same pain as before. The resentment that occupied her heart had turned into an understanding that, although painful, helped her move forward. She had learned that love was not only about sharing good moments, but also having the strength to face the darkest moments and move on, even when it seemed that everything was collapsing. Over time, she began to rediscover herself. She gave herself space to do things that had left aside, things that made her feel alive. She painted again, something she had loved since she was a child, but had left behind for dedicating so much to her relationship. She received an invitation for an art exhibition and decided to attend, something she would never have done before, when her life was completely revolving around the relationship with Andres. In that exhibition, something inside her clicked, a feeling of freedom, of possibility. There, among the works of unknown artists, she realized that she could also create something unique, something that only she could build. Healing came to her life as a slow but constant process. She began to go out with old friends, to meet new people, to enjoy her own company. She joined groups that shared her passions and began to make new friends. But beyond all that, what really began to change was her relationship with herself. She accepted herself as she was, with all her strengths and vulnerabilities, with her fears and dreams. She understood that the true source of love was inside her, not in a relationship with another human being, and much less in someone who had not valued her. In the end, the protagonist found the strength she thought she had lost. Her heart, although still scarred, was stronger than ever. She had witnessed her own resilience, and that gave her a confidence that she lacked before. She learned to set limits, to say no when something or someone did not bring her peace, to protect her well-being above all. The trip was not easy, and there were still days in which sadness invaded her, but what she had learned on her path of pain was invaluable. She was able to get up to heal and to build a new life, stronger and more purposeful than ever. The truth that she had discovered had not only freed her from Andres' lie, but had also given her the tools to rebuild her own life. And so, with each step she took, she became the best version of herself. In the end, it was not betrayal that defined her story, but the way she got up after the fall, the way she found her inner strength, above all, the way she discovered that the greatest love of all was the one that gave herself.